Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. Broadcast on Great Plains Television, that's channel 26.1, Sunday morning at 8:30, repeated at 4 in the afternoon, and then at 4:30 you get last week's episode repeated for you. You'll also find Wichita Liberty TV at my site. That's the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org on the internet. You'll find all the episodes of Wichita Liberty TV, show notes for episodes, and all the other content that I and others produce on nearly a daily basis. So today, our co-host Carl Peter John taking a day off, and we have as our guest in the studio Kansas State Representative Leo Delperdang. He's a member of the Kansas House of Representatives representing District Number 94, which is west of Mays Road from a little bit south of Kellogg up north to 29th Street. Leo was elected 2 years ago, so he's served 2 years in the House of Representatives and ran for re-election this month, last month, November, and was re-elected. So congratulations on that, Leo.
Thank you, Bob.
And thank you for taking your time to appear on Wichita Liberty TV. So, on the elections, probably the biggest result locally, statewide, is we're going to have a new governor, and not only a new governor, we knew that, but a governor of the other party than our departing governor. How's that going to make things different, do you think?
It's going to be an interesting one. It's been said to me many times, most of the people in the legislature, me included, have never worked for a Democrat governor. So it's going to be an adventure coming up. Will there be gridlock? I hope not, but I question that because the governor's not going to get any bills to them that doesn't come through the legislature.
Right.
And the legislature this year is looking more conservative than it did the last 2 years.
I think in terms of numbers between Democrat and Republicans, it's not changed much, but some of the more moderate or liberal members of the Republican caucus were defeated, replaced by, in some cases, people who had already served, but people who at least ran on a conservative campaign theme, including quite a few down here in South Central Kansas.
Yes, that's very true.
So that's going to make a difference, do you think, in...
I do. The legislature was so split up the last 2 years. You can say that the Republicans had the majority of the House. They did occupy the most seats, but it was still a mixture of about a 40-40-40 split between Democrat, middle-of-the-road moderates, and the conservatives.
So that's you oftentimes hear that, Democrats will blame something on, it was passed by a Republican legislature, which it was, or you'll hear talk about it was passed in a bipartisan fashion, but oftentimes that bipartisan group is Democrats, which are almost all united amongst a variety of issues,
Yes.
then a group of Republicans who share much more in common than the Democrats than the Republicans that are more conservative oriented.
Yes, we've seen that quite a bit over the past 2 years.
And so
Quite a bit.
you oftentimes hear a criticism that Kansans will vote for anything with an R after the name, and they oftentimes use that to criticize people like Sam Brownback or Chris Kobach or their own conservative House representative or Senate. But really, that's what all the moderate Republicans are doing. They realize that, and I remember a long time ago, a representative near Garden City told us, I could never get reelected as a Democrat out here. As a Republican, I get elected easily, but I really voted with all the Democrats all the time.
Yes, there was certain ones, and everybody knew who they were, that typically, I'm going to say 70-80% of the time voted with the Democrats.
Right.
So were they really representing the district that they represented, or were they a Democrat in the Republican seat?
And that brings up an important issue. I mean, you said everybody knows who they are, and I think people who are, of course, members, and then people who follow and pay attention, they know who's voting in a conservative and a progressive manner. And organizations like the Kansas Policy Institute and others do a good job exposing that. Even the Mainstream Coalition, although they're a progressive group, they still rank members, and you just have to turn their member list upside down, maybe. But I guess it's just too simplistic to think that you can that everybody divides up into either the Republican or the Democratic camp honestly. Is it? I mean, you can't make that assumption, can we?
You cannot. I'm thinking,
Right.
no, you cannot. And there is some where even a true legislator really needs to be working both sides of the aisle. If you're going to get things done, I cannot get a bill passed strictly on conservatives only, or the moderates and the conservatives. You've got to be working both sides of the aisle to make it happen.
And when I said honestly, I don't want to say that liberal, moderate Republicans are lying when they register as a Republican. They just do, and we've got to think a little bit further beyond just the party label. Now, sometimes all politicians, many do lie from time to time. They say certain things on the campaign trail, act differently once they're in office, and that definitely is a problem. So, Leo, we're going to take our first commercial break for a moment, and we'll be right back. Welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and our guest this week is Leo Delperdang, member of the Kansas House of Representatives from West Wichita, a Republican. And we were talking about kind of confusion between Republicans and Democrats from time to time, but there's no confusion. Laura Kelly is a progressive Democrat, is she not?
Very much so.
So she ran on platforms of we're going to spend more on schools, we're going to expand Medicaid in Kansas, and maybe some other progressive things I can't remember right now, but she said all without raising taxes.
Which makes it very interesting to see how this is going to play out.
Yeah.
I mean, we can all look at the budgets and see there is some excess money out there right now. But as the spending continues to increase over time, and it is, that money gets eaten up really quickly.
Yeah, and once we make commitments to spend more on schools this year, let's say, then that gets baked into what the spending request for the next year is. So it's not like we can just do a one-time infusion to buy something. They want more and more all
If
the
I can
time.
add that on the school funding, was it last year when we did another funding increase per the court
A
requirements?
rather large one.
Rather large one, but they talked about $500 million per year additional. That was actually $100 million per year last year. Now it becomes $200 million a year this year. So each year it's stair-stepping on top of that. That is also going to chew into the excess funds that are out there over the next couple of years.
And that spending increase, I think, was in response to the Kansas Supreme Court.
Yes, it was.
To hear Laura Kelly and others say it, we've still got to do a little bit more spending increases to meet the court's requirements.
Yeah, which I believe came down to inflation issues. So it's not a major dollar amount from what I understand, but it's just to taking inflation into consideration.
Yeah, so more spending on that. Medicaid expansion, which is, I think, a really tough issue. When Greg Orman, as governor's candidate, was here on this show, he said, you know, we got to do something because if you're really low income, you get Medicaid for free. Then there's a big gap where there's nothing, and then after that you can qualify for coverage through subsidized coverage through the exchanges. So I really understand that's a difficult issue. And is there anything we can do to close that gap, do you think?
It's a difficult issue. It's also a difficult issue when you look at the population of Kansas. So much of it is centered right along the Missouri line. And if we expand Medicaid and Missouri does not, what do you think that population is going to do? They're going to be jumping across state lines. So what we had planned, that number increases substantially. But you asked, is there something else that we could do? I'd like to just throw out, I was talking with another senator a couple days ago, and my understanding is the local government workers out in Garden City. Have you heard any of this story?
No, I haven't.
Where the local government has contracted with a clinic out there, and they pay them, I believe the number is $50 per person per month for preventative type maintenance. Zero deductible. If you need anything on a preventative type of a basis, you go to that. It resulted in Blue Cross Blue Shield actually giving a refund out there to the local government because of their costs have dropped so much.
So I'd not heard of that being applied, but that's
Right.
like the model in Wichita. There's Atlas MD, founded by Dr. Josh Umber, where, for 50, I think for guys my age, it might be $75 a month, unlimited visits.
Yes.
And he does things to get most prescription drugs at very low cost, just a couple dollars a month or something like that. And that leaves the problem, though, of a guy like me. I'm always worried I'm going to, have need a big operation or something.
I understand
and
that
Dr.
one.
Umber doesn't do that for $50
That's right.
a month. So there needs to be, and I think that's an issue that Obamacare may have cut back the ability of insurers to offer these high deductible catastrophic policies that would mesh well with the concierge type of
Right.
thing.
You'd need both of them working in conjunction with each other. So one is a catastrophe preventer and one for, so to speak, treating the community's health as a
Right.
whole.
Well, that's interesting. That would be interesting to see that applied at a broader level. I know that Dr. Umber and his father, Keen Umber, who ran for governor a few years ago, they've tried to work on some of that, but that's a really big change. So,
Yes, it is.
something that governors and states are not maybe really willing to embrace so much. There are going to be some new members in the legislature. 3 senators we know of. 2 will be selected by Democratic Party people, 1 by Republican. There could be others because the governor has to choose a whole new cabinet.
Right.
And it's oftentimes the case that some of these cabinet members come from the legislature, so that creates more openings.
Yeah, so we know the 3, obviously, Laura Kelly and Lynn Rogers.
Rogers and Vicki Schmidt and
Vicki
Topeka.
Schmidt for the insurance commissioner.
Yeah. And there's an article in the Eagle yesterday or today bemoaning the fact that there aren't elections to replace these people, elections by the people, but those elections would be kind of expensive.
They'd be kind of expensive. Same token, my understanding on the Senate side is while that is a 4-year term, they will be, quote, smaller election or nominated by the party for the first year, I believe.
Well, until the next
election.
So,
Yeah.
for example, there was a Senate election in Pittsburgh, Crawford
Yes.
County this year, because that man had, his name is Hildebrandter, he had been appointed to replace Jake LaTurner, who became state treasurer.
Right.
So he served until the next election, and he had to run this year, the only senator,
Right.
I believe, and settle that matter. So, Leo, we've come to halftime, so let's go ahead and take another commercial break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. Bob Weeks, your host. Our guest, Leo Delperdang, a Republican in the Kansas House of Representatives, serving District 94 on the west side of Wichita. Leo, today's episode will be broadcast December 2nd. So talk a little bit about the calendar. When does the session start? Second week of January or so forth? Does something happen between now and then, or are you guys just taking Christmas vacation?
Well, you mentioned December 2nd. We will be up in Topeka with kind of a last meeting with the candidates running for leadership in the legislation. The actual vote comes from us internally on December 3rd, which will be Monday morning. I want to say roughly 10 o'clock.
So pretty fast we'll know who the next speaker and majority leader. I think those are probably the 2 biggest, probably most important leadership positions. But then there's also committees that, and of course committees are where bills are introduced almost always. Committees are where testimony is taken from people, from experts, from lobbyists, from anybody who's interested citizens. Because in the legislature, once a bill gets to the floor of the House or the Senate, only the members speak, right? They don't take any more testimony at that time.
Yeah,
so,
once you're on the House floor, it's for the members only.
So that all needs to be done at committee time. So there will be some new committee chairs probably? Or?
Oh, yeah. Well, keep in mind as the leadership turns, and we'll have, for example, you may have a committee chairman for a given committee right now, but if that person ends up in the leadership ranks, that spot
Opens
becomes
up a
open,
chair there,
just the same way it has during the elections that we just recently seen.
Yeah. And how are the committee chairs, vice chairs, and ranking member chosen?
That is chosen by the Speaker's
Okay.
office. So that person makes the final determination of who's going to chair each of the committees, so to speak.
And the ranking member would be chosen by the Democratic leadership, I
Yes.
suppose. So
Yeah.
there, which, yeah, there we have that. So were some surprises we talked about, some of the new people there. Overall, we think that the House of Representatives, as he mentioned, has maybe shifted about 10 seats more to the conservative side. And will that make a difference as to how legislation is done?
In one way, yes. In another way, I'm going to say on the conservative side now, we've got, I'm going to throw out 52. So you need 63 to make things happen.
Right.
You need 84 to override a veto. So you still don't have that supermajority there. But with 52 going on the conservative side, it's going to make a difference in how things are played out up there.
And that 84 number has played a role the past couple sessions because there have been bills that were very important bills
Sure.
that were vetoed by the governor but overridden. Another one that was vetoed by the governor but I think failed by 1 or 2 votes. That would have been to expand Medicaid. It was, but to raise taxes, that bill was tried to be, the governor vetoed, but the override failed by I think just 1 or 2 votes.
Right.
So yeah, things can be very close there. So you also mentioned before when we were talking that we know there's a lot of grandstanding that goes on in the legislature when sides are debating bills. It's kind of a cyclical type of thing, but you mentioned that there were a lot of bills introduced in a 2-day period that were for political purposes. And how much did those cost, Leo? Would you talk about that, please?
I'd be happy to talk about that. There were approximately 86 bills that were brought up. Now, I take that back. 86 amendments to bills that were brought up during a 2-day period. And each one of those has a price tag associated with it. We've got the revisers group there that takes time to look at these amendments. How does it affect the bill? How does that bill affect other bills? And they've got to research it back so that if it gets voted on and passed, it's ready to go, essentially.
Yeah. So this is the Reviser Statutes Office.
Yes, it is.
Maybe you think it's kind of just a boring thing, but I mean, if you have an idea for a bill to implement some sort of public policy, because we're not lawyers, and even if you were, you can't just sit down and write out the right language. And
No.
a lot of bills say, and section number so-and-so is repealed. And
Very much so.
So all of that has to be coordinated in a way that the bill, first of all, the language, I guess, means what you want it to mean, and then that it integrates within the existing body of law somehow.
Right, it integrates within, but each bill may have an effect on another existing statute somewhere, so that has to be referenced there also.
Yeah, so and so that's a number of very highly skilled people who have
Yes,
to
it
do
is.
that. And amendments, so these are potential laws or modifications to laws that didn't go through the committee process. They were just
Correct.
kind of sprung upon the House of Representatives or maybe the Senate.
Right.
I don't want to say at the last moment, but during the debate on the floor.
Sure. And it is because of the quantity. I mean, there was about 86 of these amendments that came up.
And you thought about $3,000
roughly
each?
$3,000 to $3,500 range each. I mean, we're talking $250,000 of public citizens' money that was spent on the research to get these through that never went anywhere.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take our last commercial break, but when we get back, I'd like to tell me why were these things introduced and why oftentimes are they introduced. Stay tuned for just a moment and we'll talk about that. Welcome back to our last segment of Wichita Liberty TV for today. Bob Weeks, your host, Leo Delperdang, member of the Kansas House of Representatives from West Wichita. So we were talking about bills or amendments that get introduced with no hope of passing. And does the cynic in me say that these were put up just for political purposes?
Some are political purposes. Some are self-serving for individuals carrying the amendments or the bills. And that's the part that it's almost disgusting seeing this happen.
Sometimes
because of the
these
cost.
get a lot of news coverage, don't they?
They get a lot of news
because there's a
coverage.
dramatic introduction and so forth. So you might get on TV.
You get on TV, or if you work in a certain industry that may benefit from certain amendments or bills. That's, to me, there needs to be a look of, I can't think of the term. Anyway, if I've got something to benefit from it, I should not be carrying the bill.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So,
And are sometimes these things done for what they call postcard basis? In other words,
Oh,
that if you can have a bill or amendment that's kind of sharply worded to try to box people into a corner,
Yes.
then that can be fodder for commercials against, or sometimes for people at next election
very
time.
much so, very much so. And I apologize earlier, but it was conflict of interest is
Okay.
the word I was trying to search for here. But yes, you'd actually hear comments on the floor as different ones would go up when the voting was happening against pro or against these amendments. People would be yelling out postcard, and that's exactly what was going on.
So it's not, it might not even be a real issue that has any really importance, except
Right.
it sounds important kind of to people.
It sounds important, or it's a way that you can twist around what's actually going on and be able to throw a postcard out on somebody else that says they voted against this specific bill. Well, yeah, we voted against it because you had this amendment or this amendment in there that was corrupting it in some
Sometimes
form.
I think they call that a poison pill or
Yes, they
something to do that. So these amendments, just a little bit of insight, the way things work, sometimes they're voted on a voice vote, but then if enough members want, they can force a recorded vote. Is that
Yes,
right?
they can. Yes, they can.
So it's those recorded votes that then are published in the journal.
In the journal, yes.
And organizations can make use of them as they want. So Representative Delperdang, any issues that you're going to be working on personally in this year, or ones that you think are really important this year?
Oh, there's several that have come up through the year. I mean, we're still concerned about the education. Do we need a constitutional amendment on that or not? It's not for me to say, but it needs to be brought up. It's something I think should come to the people.
So this is an amendment that the conservatives favor that would remove some power from the state Supreme Court, maybe all the courts, about how much the legislature needs to spend on schools.
Right, put it back to the elected officials. But really that constitutional amendment is not something we as a legislature are going to do. It's simply to get it out to the people of the state, to let the people vote on it, to let them determine, is it something we need or not?
Because to pass an amendment in Kansas, you have to get 2/3 of the vote in the House, then 2/3 in the Senate, then it's going to be put on a ballot that the people of Kansas vote on. Just needs a majority after that.
That's correct.
So governor has no role except just as persuasion, what.
Sure.
And she has favors she can do for people and punishments she can dish out.
Sure.
So that happens too. So that amendment, what about Convention of the States? Are we going anywhere with that this year?
I'm thinking that we're going to see another attempt on that one, very possible.
And because of the kind of the shift of the House, more conservative, the Senate seems to be pretty much the same. Is it likely that there's going to be some tension between those two bodies,
There
more
could
than
be.
usual?
Last year, the Convention of States was originated on the Senate side, and it failed on the Senate. So it never even had a chance to come over to the House. I've heard talk they may try originating it on the House side, a little more conservative this year. I believe the Senate maybe have a little more conservatism to allow it to pass. I can't speak for the Senate, but I'm hearing it may be introduced on the House side this year.
Okay. And I know that Governor Collier this year had some transparency initiatives, and one of the things that we always talk about are these gut and go maneuvers and the conference committee reports that where stuff can get shoved on a body by the other chamber, and voted on without really knowing what's going on. Do you see any move to correct any of that abuse, if in fact you think it is abuse?
There was some changes last year or last session that allowed, for example, if I originated a bill, it's got my name on there.
Yeah.
and it doesn't go anywhere. It's sitting in the committee, and the committee needs a different bill where they're going to gut that, throw something else completely in it. It's still got my name on the top of it. So that changed so that we're a little more of an accounting of who's originating this, where it's coming from. There is a little bit, there's more transparency going on with the fact that the committees now, most of them have video feeds out of it. If they don't have video, they do have audio. Anybody out there on the internet can get these. So that's helped quite a bit too.
So that is some improvement. Well, let's hope that that keeps up. So, well, Representative Leo Delperdang, we're out of time for today. Thanks so much for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV. And we'll be back again next week with another episode. Thanks for watching.